Okay, all right. Apologies for the in and out there on the microphone. Hopefully we've got that corrected and it won't be an issue going forward. If it is, please continue to let us know via chat and we'll see if we can get it corrected. Sorry about that. And another reason that we see DDoS attacks being conducted are distraction motives. So this is what we see sometimes, a DDoS attack uh, that is conducted in conjunction with some other type of attack, and the DDoS is designed to be the big attention getter, and it diverts the victim's resources away from other things to trying to correct the DDoS, and it allows the attacker to be able to conduct the other attacks without being noticed as quickly because the victim's resources are busy trying to take care of the DDoS. So this is a graphical or a picture representation of kind of what a DDoS attack looks like to resources. So on the left side, you see what would be a system or a network under a normal load with just light traffic. And then on the right-hand side, you see what that system might look like when a DDoS attack is occurring. Everything's all gummed up and there aren't resources available and the traffic can't move. So just a picture to kind of illustrate the point there. So this is some information that comes from Arbor Networks report that came out last year. There's a lot of different ways to think about how to classify different types of DDoS attacks. I think this one is pretty good, pretty easy to understand. So what they talk about are one type being volumetric attacks. So these are very high volumes of traffic. And this is where the attacker is trying to consume all the bandwidth either in the network or in the resources that are available on the server to try to gum up the works and use up all the resources so there aren't resources available to satisfy legitimate requests. So this is just a huge amount of traffic coming towards the victim. So that's volumetric attacks. The second type that's listed here are TCP state exhaustion attacks. So these attacks are, rather than trying to fill up the network pipe or use all available resources, they're focused on filling up connection tables, either in servers or routers that may sit in front of those servers or firewalls that sit in front of those servers. So you can send a much smaller amount of attack traffic, just one or two packets, TCP send packets to start a connection, send a whole bunch of those and never complete those connections, and you fill up the connection table. So that's the second type. And then the other type that's mentioned here are application layer attacks. So these are much more difficult generally to conduct, and they're much smaller volumes. They're harder to detect, and they're designed to abuse some resource capacity within the application itself. So oftentimes they're focused on a particular application or some weakness in that application. So again, these are much harder for an attacker to conduct. They require much more investment of time on their part, and they're a lot harder to detect. So oftentimes these are some of the most difficult types of attacks to defend against. So those are the three types. And then within this same report from Arbor, they outline kind of what they've seen across the industry space in terms of the breakdown of those attacks. So 65% roughly fall into the volumetric category, 20% in the state exhaustion category, and 17% in the application layer category. So a lot of times we get asked questions here, well, how do attackers conduct these attacks? You know, they must be very skilled. And actually, some of those types of attacks do require a lot of skill, but most of them don't, particularly the volumetric ones. There's been a rise over the last couple of years in DDoS as a service. So this is an example of a website you can go to actually purchase a DDoS attack. You look at it, you see it looks very much like Amazon.com or a shopping website where you just click on what you want. You can click add to cart, and then down at the bottom you can see you can actually customize it with the little sliders to figure out how much time you want in terms of how long the attack will last, what kind of bandwidth you want, and how long you want it to last. And you can see this example down here, as much as $5. And here's another website where you can purchase DDoS attacks, and you can see here as little as $2.50. So it doesn't require a lot of money. and it doesn't really require any technical skill at all. You just have to know where to find these websites, and a quick Google search will turn up about a half a dozen that you can easily access. So this is what DDoS attacks are not legal. The question was someone asked is this legal? You can see both of these sites here, these two, actually use the term stressing. So IP stress test, the one on the right, the one on the left, IP stressor. These two happen to market themselves as stress testing services. So offering the services to test your own network capabilities, how well it stands up to load coming in. So certainly that is shrouded in somewhat air of legitimacy, but the reality is that folks use these for conducting DDoS attacks, and some of them you'll find actually don't even make any pretense about the fact that they're stress testing. They market themselves as attack services, but they absolutely are not legal in terms of conducting malicious attacks. But this is the threat landscape. This is what's out here. This is what we're, as network practitioners and security practitioners, are facing in terms of adversaries. So now we want to talk a little bit about some of our observations, what we see on NCREN with attacks, and this is around motivations for attacks. Most of the attacks we'll see in a minute are in the K-12 school space or the university space. And for K-12 schools, the attacks that we see there, the majority of the ones we see are actually perpetrated by students at schools. Their students are intent on disrupting class or avoiding online testing. So as instruction and testing moves more and more online, the students have found that they can disrupt those activities with these DDoS attacks. And we kind of term this as the modern day equivalent of pulling the fire alarm to get out of class. In some cases, there's often revenge that's motivating these. I know we've had at least one case where a student was mad that they were disciplined by a teacher, and so they conducted a DDoS attack to get back at the teacher for that discipline. So that happens as well. You can probably lump all of these into the category of teenagers doing stupid teenager things, but that's a lot of what we see in the K-12 space. It's a little bit different in the university or higher ed space. The motivations there are mixed. We see a lot of attack traffic that's taking advantage of vulnerable systems. University environments are generally designed to be very open. Oftentimes the IT is decentralized, so you'll have individual departments within the universities who have autonomy over what goes on the network. And so a lot of times you get systems that aren't well secured that pop up for research purposes or just to get something done. And in those cases, a lot of times those systems are compromised and being used to send out DDoS traffic. So we see a lot of that. We also see a lot of online gaming related DDoS activity in the higher ed space. I would say the bulk of the large attacks that we've seen in the university space have been online gaming related, where you'll have a PlayStation or an Xbox connected to a residence network, and a student's playing a game, and someone else who's playing the game in another part of the world decides that they want to take that gamer offline, so they'll throw a huge amount of network traffic into the network to try to disrupt that gamer from being able to play the game. So we see a lot of that. All right, so now we'll move on to some data for what we see in terms of attacks on the NCREN network. I've got a bunch of charts to show you here. So this one is, we go from September to August, and the blue line that you see is the 2014-2015 year, so that's last year, and the red line is this year, so that goes from September through, we have data through June of this year. So what you'll notice in this particular chart is this is the number of individual attacks that we saw during this period. So you'll notice that the trend here is that the number of attacks was generally much higher last year than what we saw this year. And another interesting trend to note is that we generally see attack traffic at a higher level between September and May when the students are in schools, and then during the summer months when students are out of school, the attack traffic drops off. So that's another trend that's interesting to note there. So again, this is the number of attacks. And this is the same period, but instead of the number of attacks, this is aggregate volume of attack traffic on a monthly basis, so the amount of attack traffic. So you can see that here the trend is reversed, where this year the volume levels have been consistently higher than they were last year for the most of the year. When you got to March, it actually dropped off here. So there's a question that came in over chat that says, do the dips correspond with spring break for school systems or universities? I don't know that we can make that conclusion. We haven't made that conclusion here. We could probably go back and postulate that, but I don't think that that correlation necessarily exists. I'm not sure, honestly, what causes those dips, but they do kind of ebb and flow over the course of the year. The general trend is that they're higher when students are in and lower when they're out. So really much higher traffic volume levels throughout the bulk of this year until you got to March. You can see there in April, the attack traffic volume is actually lower this year than it was last year. And then even in May, lower, and then in June, they're kind of at the same level. So it'll be interesting to see what trend emerges when students come back in September of this year. But that's what we're seeing. This is the same data, just plotted continuously instead of year over year. This is the number of attacks, and then this is the volume of attacks. So you can see on the previous chart, the general trend was decreasing number of attacks, and here the general trend is increasing volume. So if you combine those two together, that tells us the number of attacks is getting smaller, but the volume is getting bigger. That tells us that the size of individual attacks is getting bigger as well. And so that's kind of reflected on this chart. This is a plot of attacks that we've seen on the NCRN network that are larger than 10 gigabits per second in size. And so you'll notice going back to 2014, we had a few of those. And then you really got into really kind of August, September timeframe in 2015, and that number of large attacks bigger than 10 gigs really kind of exploded, and now it's kind of dropped off a bit there. But that's very large attacks that we've been seeing. You can see we've seen a couple there that are over or right at 60 gigabits per second in size. So those are very, very large individual DDoS attacks. So this here is a breakdown based on the customer groups inside of NCRN. On the left side, that's the volume of attacks, and on the right side, that's the number of attacks. So you can see that in terms of volume, almost 54% of the volume of attack traffic that we see on NCRN is directed at K-12 schools, and roughly 30% is directed at universities. And then in terms of the number of attacks, it's similar numbers, a little bit under 30% coming to universities and a little bit under 50% directed at K-12. The purple is MCNC infrastructure, and I can tell you that the majority of that number is actually the Zscaler web security service that we offer. We see in those K-12 schools that students target the proxy infrastructure. I suspect a lot of that is not necessarily targeting the proxy knowingly. It's they figure out what their external IP address is, and it happens to be that proxy, and then that's what they end up targeting. We have another question here.
Has the number of attacks on government increased since HB2?
Yes. The question was, has the number of attacks on government sites increased since HB2? The answer to that is yes, although that increase is very small because we saw very little, in fact, almost none targeting government prior to HB2, and we've seen a small number of attacks. We saw the one that was associated with Anonymous that article referenced earlier in the presentation, but aside from that, there hasn't been a whole lot. So it's not like there's been a massive increase. There has been an increase, but really the bulk of that increase is down to there really was almost none before. Okay, so we want to talk about what MCNC is doing to help protect customers from the effects of DDoS attacks. So this is a very, very simplistic representation of one of our peering locations on the NCREN network. So this is where we would peer NCREN with external internet providers. So this is to kind of give you an illustration of our scrubbing centers that we've built on the network and how they work. So you can see on the left side of the screen, you've got different internet providers that we peer with, connections coming into what's listed as a peering router there, and then a backbone router that routes into the NCREN network, and then the backbone. And then you'll also note there's a attack detection capability listed at the top right of the picture, and then at the bottom of the picture in the middle, there's a box that's labeled Scrubbing Center. So normal traffic comes in from one of these connections that we peer with, comes into the peering router, flows through to the backbone router, and then goes into the backbone of the network, and then on down to the customer inside of our network. When we detect attack traffic, we have the attack detection there that is doing net flow sampling of flows that are happening on the backbone, and this tool is analyzing the net flow data, looking for signs of DDoS attacks. And so when an attack is detected, there's a signal that happens over to the scrubbing center and lets it know that, hey, there's an attack going on. We can do traffic diversion there at the peering router so that traffic that's destined for the victim gets diverted into the scrubbing center. So the way this works is that traffic coming into the victim there is listed in red, and we would, through BGP flow spec, place a rule on the peering router that would, instead of sending it on through to the backbone, would divert that traffic into the scrubbing center. So the scrubbing center offers multiple ways to do mitigation and clean out the bad traffic. So what happens in the scrubbing center is that the attack traffic is removed from the flow, and then the clean traffic is passed out of the scrubbing center back to the router, flows on in through to the backbone, and then downstream to the customer. So the net effect here is that the attack traffic is cleaned out and thrown away, and the legitimate traffic is allowed to continue on to the customer. So this is, again, very simplistic representation of how our scrubbing centers work. We have, at this point, deployed 2 scrubbing centers, and we have a third one that will be coming online later this year. So that's what we're doing, and that technology, the scrubbing center technology, is built on technology from a company called Arbor Networks, who specializes in traffic analysis and also in DDoS attack mitigation. So here's an update on what we're doing with the scrubbing centers. I'm just waiting for the slide to refresh here. So we have updated our core routing infrastructure in the network, and those updates were completed in winter and spring of 2016. We had to update a bunch of things in the core network to prepare them for the traffic diversion that I mentioned before and get them up to the latest code revs so that we would be able to take advantage of this scrubbing center technology. So that's been done. We have deployed also some additional infrastructure to support the DDoS scrubbing. So as we introduced the scrubbing centers, in order to do the traffic diversion and re-injection into the network, we needed some additional routing components. We needed to make some architecture changes, so that's been done as well. The scrubbing centers themselves, I mentioned we've deployed 2. The first 2 scrubbing centers were actually implemented in May. They are online, operational, and available to scrub attack traffic. And the third scrubbing center that I mentioned is scheduled to come online later in 2016, probably sometime in the September or October timeframe. That third scrubbing center in no way prevents us from scrubbing traffic today. This is just a way to give us additional redundancy and capacity for the DDoS scrubbing capability. So at this point, we are considering this DDoS protection capability fully operational. We will just be adding in additional capacity later in the year. So what this does is give us what we're terming enhanced DDoS protection capabilities. This is traffic monitoring and attack detection that I mentioned previously. It's multi-layered mitigation, meaning that we have inside those scrubbing centers a variety of different mitigation techniques that we can turn on depending on the type of attack that we're seeing. We also have, through our relationship with Arbor Networks, access to their advanced research and response resources. So what that means is that if we see a particular attack that is brand new, that there is no preset mitigation for, we have 24/7 access to their threat response team who will get on the phone with us, engage with us, do real-time traffic analysis, and help us craft a mitigation if there isn't one that exists already. So we have those resources available to us that all they do all day long is analyze DDoS attack traffic and build mitigation capabilities. We have those resources available to assist us if we need to call on. So that's what we're doing with our scrubbing centers. I do want to mention a few important points here about the scrubbing technology and our scrubbing centers. The first one is a question we often get: how do I sign up for this DDoS protection? And the answer is that you don't sign up for it, or that you, actually more accurately, you're already signed up for it. If you get network service from MCNC, you are covered by this protection capability. These protections are part of the standard network service that you get when you're an NCREN customer. You do not need to sign up or pay for anything else in order to get this protection. That's a very different story than what you will find from many other network providers. So we think this is just another way that MCNC adds value to our customer base. So again, you are already getting the benefit of this protection. Another question that we often get is, does this guarantee that we will never have another DDoS issue? And I can, with absolute confidence, answer that question as no. And the reason is that it is possible that you may face an attack that MCNC's solution cannot easily mitigate. However, we now operate a significantly improved ability to protect you against DDoS attacks. So it's not a magic bullet. It's not a guarantee. And we want to make sure that folks clearly understand that. However, it is a pretty powerful capability, and we certainly will do everything we can to utilize this capability to protect our customers from DDoS attacks. It's also important to note here that the solution that we have deployed is very much designed to address volumetric attacks and infrastructure layer DDoS attacks. So that would be those state exhaustion attacks and the volumetric attacks. This solution is not necessarily designed to deal with application layer attacks, and that is because it's very difficult for us in our position in the middle of the network to have the level of understanding of every application that's deployed on the network in order to effectively defend against application layer attacks. So I want everyone to understand that our solution is really not designed to address those threats. What I will tell you, though, is that if you do face one of those attacks, you should contact our NOC because we may be able to do something with Arbor once we've diverted the traffic into it. It does offer some application layer protection capabilities. So if you do come under one of those attacks, it's important to contact us because we might be able to do something to help. It's just that we're not really designing the solution to detect that out of the gate. So I've just said it's important to engage MCNC, and so the question is, how do you do that? The best way to do that is to contact our NOC. You can see the phone number listed there. We have support representatives available 24/7 in the NOC to assist with DDoS mitigation or any other network issues. So absolutely, if you're having an attack, that is who you should contact, or you think you're under attack, you should contact them because they can make sure they get a hold of the right resources here at MCNC to get the mitigation underway quickly. So again, you want to do this anytime that you are under attack or you think you might be under attack. We can help you determine if you're under attack or not. So even if you're not sure what's going on, please call us and talk to us. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to help protect your environment against DDoS. So you know what MCNC is doing now with our scrubbing centers. The first thing you can do is make sure that your business continuity or disaster recovery and your incident response plans have something in them that speaks to how you will respond to a DDoS attack. It's important to plan for that ahead of time. And in that planning, you want to make sure to think about internal communications. That's important because sometimes the way people plan to communicate might be via email, or they might plan to communicate via phone. But if your phone is VoIP-based and the attack takes down the network, email and VoIP phone traffic may not be available to you. Those services might be taken offline by the attack. So it's important to think about how you plan to communicate. The other thing I would make sure you do is, particularly if you're not an MCNC customer, make sure you understand what your ISP can do and is doing for you, and how to contact them and engage them if you do come under attack, because they likely will be an important part of responding to the attack. So make sure you understand that as part of your response plan. You also want to make sure that your applications are patched and hardened, and make sure that your network infrastructure is patched and hardened. This is particularly important in dealing with application layer DDoS attacks. If an application is known to be vulnerable to a certain type of attack, and there is a security update that's available from the vendor, you want to make sure that you have that deployed so that your system is not vulnerable. So again, on the applications and on the network infrastructure, make sure you're doing that. Least privilege filtering is important, and this is important both inbound and outbound. I mentioned earlier in some of the observations about what we see on NCRN, we see a lot of outbound DDoS attack traffic. So this is important to control what's allowed in and out of your network. If you have no need to receive inbound SNMP traffic from the internet, or DNS traffic to any host on your network from the internet, throw that stuff away at the gateway. There's other types of traffic too, but anything that you don't absolutely need, block it upstream at the edge of your network. And then also, if you don't have a need to pass that traffic outbound, make sure you block it on your network. That way you won't be allowing potential DDoS attack traffic heading towards someone else to leave your network. Prevent spoof traffic from leaving your network. This is important. If you have packets that are leaving your network that claim to be from a source that is not actually on your network, you want to throw that away. These very large volumetric attacks are successful because they rely on a technique called amplification. And amplification attacks cannot exist without spoof traffic. So if every person with a presence on the internet prevented spoof traffic from leaving their network, these large volumetric attacks would not be able to be successful. So that's an important thing for folks to do, is prevent that traffic. There's a number of things that you can look at, specifications that talk about anti-spoofing, BCP 38, RFC 2827, and something called URPF, Unicast Reverse Path Forwarding. You can do a search on those, and they will provide you information on anti-spoofing practices and what you can do on your network to prevent that spoof traffic from leaving. Another thing you can do is monitor your web logs for outbound traffic that's going to interesting sites, and some of those are site traffic that may be going to these DDoS attack services that we mentioned earlier. And another one that's interesting is folks looking up, what is my IP address, going to IP Chicken or what is myip.com, those types of services. And I mention those here because we have seen these, particularly in the K-12 schools, as indicators when there is a student that is conducting a DDoS attack. You would think that a student that was going to do that wouldn't actually visit the DDoS attack service website from the school network, but over and over again we actually see that. So it's helpful to be monitoring your web log traffic for traffic going to those types of sites, because that's an indicator that you might have something that you should be concerned about. You might catch it before it becomes a problem for you. It's a question.
How does Zscaler classify a DDoS attack service site?
So the question is, how does Zscaler classify the DDoS attack service sites? And I do not know the answer to that.
I've seen two classifications. One is professional services. The other one is miscellaneous or unknown. Miscellaneous unknown being the biggest part, right? Professional services because they are stress test sites.
The other point that is listed here is make sure your network traffic can be segmented. And this is important because we've seen this be a problem with some customers who have come under DDoS attack. If all of your outbound traffic is natted to a single IP address, and that IP address comes under DDoS attack, and you want to block some incoming traffic, you may impact legitimate services from being able to function. So if you can segment out your outbound traffic from your web server IP address or your DNS server IP address, that's a good thing to do, because then you can apply rules and filters that only impact the system that's being targeted without impacting everything at the same time. So that's something you want to make sure you look at in your network architecture. And the last one is DDoS specific protection. We mentioned earlier not really necessarily having our scrubbing center capability focus on application layer attacks. So in your planning and your incident response efforts, you need to think about what's the threat for application layer attack look like for your institution and how you want to deal with that. And that could include a specific anti-DDoS solution, something like a cloud service, maybe like Cloudflare or Akamai's Prolexic service. Also, perhaps an on-premise DDoS protection capability, maybe like a Radware or a Carrero Security or even Arbor Networks. They offer on-premise solutions that may be appropriate for you given what your threat landscape looks like. Also, load balancers are things to think about. Sometimes people don't think about those. So we've seen customers whose firewalls may be vulnerable to having their connection table filled up. And if you can put maybe a load balancer like an F5 or something like that in front of the firewall, that's a very effective way to help deal with those types of attacks. Firewalls themselves sometimes offer DDoS protection capabilities, particularly for things like stateful attacks, or if it's an application aware firewall or an application layer firewall, it might be able to detect patterns of known DDoS attacks and filter those out, application layer attacks. And the last one is IPS systems. We've seen customers use those successfully to defeat state-based attacks or to detect known attack patterns as well and filter that traffic away. So those are all things that you can think about to deploy on your own networks to help protect against the threat of DDoS. So that concludes the presentation that we have this morning. So we can pause here and take some questions if you have any. Okay, doesn't look like I'm seeing any in the chat window. If you do have questions that come up, you can feel free to contact me. We will be making the slides available, and on the first slide, my email address is on there, so you can contact me directly. You can contact any of the folks from the C&E group that you work with, and they can relay questions to the appropriate folks internally. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have a question specifically about your institution and DDoS. We'll be happy to talk to you about that. If you do come under an attack or are worried about a specific network event that it's happening, the best thing for you to do is contact our NOC, because they, again, are available 24/7 and can help make sure that you get response quickly in those situations. So thank you all for joining today, and we'll see you next week for next week's webinar. Thank you.